The massive black warship smashed into normal space above the burning world of Lemnos, the pride of Earth's legendary Black Fleet here to visit vengeance on the hated Crocs butchers. Commander Greg Henry stood on the bridge of the HSS Indomitable, the sleek vessel bristling with humanity's most advanced weaponry. His crew moved with calm efficiency, born of endless battles, as Greg studied the scans flooding the view screens. Lemnorian cities lay in ruins, massive energy signatures of Crocs weapons crisscrossing the surface. The ruthless alien invaders had already slaughtered millions and pushed the peaceful Lemnorians to the precipice of extinction. But not this time, not while humanity still drew breath. "Open a fleet-wide channel," Greg ordered, his voice frigid with resolve. The comms officer nodded, and the commander's hardened visage appeared on screens across the 50 mighty Earth warships. "Warriors of the Black Fleet, here is our task. We will save the Lemnorians from annihilation, no matter the cost. We will send the Crocs screaming back to the void that spawned them. For the honor of our fleet and for the glory of Earth, man your battle stations. Launch all strike craft and prepare drop pods. It is time we remind the galaxy why no one fucks with the human race." Alarms blared as the Black Fleet mobilized with brutal precision. Flights of deadly interceptors and bombers streaked from launch bays, racing to secure air dominance over Lemnos. In the troop decks, grim-faced Marines loaded heavy weapons and strapped on battle armor, preparing to deploy to the surface to evacuate civilians. "Commander Henry, thank the gods you've come." The face of Lemnorian Counselor Xander appeared on the bridge holoscreen, the alien's features gaunt with desperation and terror. "The Crocs have butchered countless innocents. We beg for your protection, please." Greg stared back coldly. The Lemnorians had stubbornly refused to join humanity's alliance, clinging to their doomed neutrality, even as the Crocs rampaged across the stars like a plague. In their hubris, they had brought this disaster on themselves. But humanity would answer their cries for help all the same. It was their way to protect the innocent, when no one else would or could, even those whose naivete and arrogance had left them helpless before ravenous alien monsters. "We will stop the Crocs," Greg replied flatly. "But your independence is forfeit. Lemnos will become an Earth protectorate under our absolute authority, effective immediately. You will submit to our rule, or we will leave you to your fate. Decide now." The Lemnorian counselor nodded shakily, all pride and resistance shattered by this display of humanity's overwhelming military superiority and unshakable resolve against annihilation. "We submit fully to Earth. Please, Commander, save our species from these butchers." There could be no other choice. Humanity always protected those in need, and the Crocs would learn once more the folly of drawing the wrath of the Black Fleet. Greg's fingers fly over the command console as he coordinates the Black Fleet's counterattack. The dreadnought's shields flicker under the concentrated barrage from the human warships, but it refuses to yield. It returns fire with a vengeance, scorching the hulls of several cruisers. "Sir, the dreadnought's armor is too thick," the tactical officer shouts over the chaos. "Our weapons can't penetrate it." Greg grits his teeth, his mind racing. They can't let that monstrosity reach Lemnos. Millions of lives hang in the balance. "Prep the Nova cannon," he orders, his voice steely with willpower. "We'll crack that bastard open like an egg." The bridge crew hesitates for a split second. The Nova cannon is humanity's ultimate weapon, a devastating device capable of unleashing a miniature supernova, but it's never been tested in actual combat. "Do it," Greg barks, brooking no argument. As the Nova cannon charges, Greg watches the battle unfold on the monitors. Crocs fighters swarm the human strike craft, trying to overwhelm them with sheer numbers. But the human pilots are skilled and tenacious, weaving through the enemy formation and picking off the Crocs with surgical precision. On the surface of Lemnos, dropships disgorge squads of heavily armed Marines into the fray. Sergeant Hawkins leads Reaper Squad through the rubble-strewn streets of the capital, their armor scorched and dented from relentless Crocs fire. They push forward with steadfast perseverance, cutting down the alien invaders with ruthless efficiency. "Keep moving," Hawkins bellows, his rifle spitting death. "We've got civilians to save." Meanwhile, Lieutenant Blake coordinates with Councillor Zander, setting up makeshift evacuation points in the heart of the Lemnorian cities. Terrified civilians flood into the safe zones, clutching meager possessions and crying out for loved ones. Blake and his men work tirelessly to maintain order and provide what comfort they can. Back in orbit, the Nova cannon reaches full charge. Greg takes a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. A blinding lance of pure energy erupts from the Indomitable's prow, streaking towards the Croc's dreadnought. It punches through the enemy shields like they're made of paper, burrowing deep into the warship's hull. For a moment, nothing happens. Then the dreadnought explodes in a cataclysmic fireball, the shockwave buffeting the nearby ships. Cheers erupt across the human fleet as the mighty vessel disintegrates into a cloud of molten debris. But Greg knows the battle is just getting started. The Crocs will regroup and come at them even harder. They always do. He opens a channel to the fleet. All ships press the attack. We've got them on the ropes. Let's finish this. As the Black Fleet surges forward, Greg can only hope they've bought enough time for the evacuation on the surface. The Lemnorians are counting on them, and he'll be damned if he lets them down. The Indomitable shudders as it takes a glancing blow from a Croc's cruiser, alarms blaring across the bridge. Greg clutches the command console, his fingers tightening. They're taking a pounding, but they can't falter now. Too much is at stake. No, failure is not an option. The Black Fleet will hold the line. They will save Lemnos or die trying. The bridge of the Indomitable shuddered as the massive warship plunged through Lemnos's atmosphere. Commander Greg Henry stood at the helm, his eyes locked on the tactical display. The surface of the planet was a chaotic mess of energy signatures, Croc's forces swarming like locusts, human dropships darting between them, and the fading life signs of countless Lemnorian civilians. "Weapons. Target those Crocs concentrations near the evac points," Greg barked. "Use precision strikes only. We can't risk collateral damage." The ship's AI responded instantly, unleashing a barrage of pinpoint energy beams that lanced down from the sky. Croc's positions erupted in flames as the Indomitable's superior firepower made itself known. On the ground, Sergeant Zach Hawkins and Reaper Squad fought with the desperation of cornered animals. They'd formed a makeshift barricade out of rubble and wrecked vehicles, creating a last line of defense between the Crocs and the terrified Lemnorian civilians huddled behind them. "Roberts, watch our left flank," Zach shouted over the din of battle. "Chen, I need suppressing fire on that group trying to flank us." Plasma bolts sizzled past Zach's head as he popped up to take another shot. He caught a Croc's trooper square in the chest, watching with grim satisfaction as the alien went down. But for everyone they killed, it seemed like two more took its place. The comm in Zach's helmet crackled. "Sergeant Hawkins, this is Councillor Zander. I'm approaching your position from the east. I need cover fire to make it through." Zach signaled to his team. "All right, Reapers, you heard the man. Let's clear a path." Reaper Squad shifted their fire, concentrating on the Croc's forces to the east. Under the withering barrage, the aliens were forced to take cover, creating a narrow corridor. Through the smoke and chaos, Zach spotted a figure sprinting towards them, Councillor Zander clutching a strange device to his chest. The Lemnorian official dove behind the barricade, just as a wave of green gas washed over the position he'd vacated seconds before. "Cutting it a bit close there, Councillor," Zach said, helping Zander to his feet. The Lemnorian's eyes were wide with fear and adrenaline. "We don't have much time. This device should neutralize their chemical weapons, but I need to get closer to their main force." Before Zach could respond, the sky lit up. The massive form of the Indomitable descended through the clouds, its weapons blazing. Croc's positions across the battlefield erupted in flames. Zach allowed himself a small smile. With the Indomitable providing air support, they might just have a chance. He turned to Zander. "All right, Councillor. Let's see what that gadget of yours can do. Reapers, we're pushing forward." As Reaper Squad prepared to mount their desperate counterattack, the battle for Lemnos entered a new phase. The Indomitable loomed overhead, a symbol of humanity's willpower. On the ground, Humans and Lemnorians fought side by side against the Crocs' onslaught. The fate of an entire world hung in the balance. The Indomitable plummeted through Lemnos's atmosphere, its hull glowing bright orange from the friction. Commander Greg Henry stood at the helm, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. "Target that Croc's dreadnought," he ordered, his voice cutting through the din of alarms and status reports. "All batteries, prepare to fire on my mark." The weapons officer's fingers flew across his console. "Targeting solution acquired, sir. Ready to fire." Greg took a deep breath. This was it, their chance to turn the tide. "Fire!" The Indomitable shuddered as its main guns unleashed a devastating barrage. Streaks of energy lanced upward, punching through the atmosphere and into orbit. On the planet's surface, Sergeant Zach Hawkins and his Reaper squad huddled behind their makeshift barricade. Plasma bolts sizzled overhead as Croc's troops pressed their attack. Counselor Xander sprinted towards them, clutching a strange device to his chest. "Sergeant," Xander shouted as he dove behind cover, "I have a plan to neutralize their chemical weapon, but it's a one-way trip." Zach looked at the device, then back at Xander. He nodded grimly. "I'll do it. My team can cover your escape." Zach cut him off. "No time to argue. Get those civilians out of here." Up in orbit, Greg saw the feed from Zach's helmet cam. His mind focused. "Lieutenant Chen, take us in. We're going low and hot." The Indomitable screamed towards the surface, its engines straining against the pull of gravity. As they neared the battlefield, Greg gave the order. "All forward batteries, open fire." A storm of explosives rained down on the Croc's war machine. It staggered under the assault, giving Zach the opening he needed. He charged forward, device in hand. "Cover me!" he shouted to his squad. Reaper squad laid down suppressing fire as Zach sprinted across the debris-strewn ground. The Croc's machine, damaged but still operational, swung one massive arm towards him. Zach ducked and rolled, coming up right beneath the war machine's legs. With a grunt of effort, he leapt upward, grabbing onto the machine's hull. The Croc's pilot snarled, trying to shake him off. But Zach held on, climbing higher. He reached the machine's core and slammed the device into place. It latched on with a satisfying click. Zach let go, dropping to the ground and sprinting back towards cover. Behind him, the war machine began to shudder and spark. Then, with a blinding flash, it exploded. A wave of energy pulsed outward, and the chemical weapon in the air simply vanished. As the light faded, Xander and the surviving Lemnorians peeked out from their hiding spots. The Indomitable hovered above, its presence both reassuring and awe-inspiring. Zach looked up at the Indomitable, then over at Xander and the Lemnorians. He nodded, a fierce grin spreading across his face. The battle for Lemnos wasn't over, but now they had a fighting chance. The Indomitable's engines roared as it descended through Lemnos's atmosphere, the massive warship's hull glowing orange from the friction. Commander Greg Henry stood on the bridge, his eyes locked on the tactical display. "All ships commence orbital bombardment," Greg ordered, his voice cutting through the din of the bridge. "Target Croc's strongholds only. Minimize collateral damage." The Black Fleet responded instantly. A hail of high-yield ordnance rained down on the planet's surface, each impact precisely calculated. Explosions blossomed across the landscape as Croc's fortifications crumbled under the assault. On the ground, Corporal Jake Mason felt his Grizzly Walker shudder as he piloted it across the battlefield. The massive war machine's feet left deep imprints in the soil with each thunderous step. Jake's hands flew across the controls, directing the Walker's array of weapons. "Grizzly Squad, form up," Jake called out over the comm. "We've got Lemnorians pinned down at Sector 7. As Jake's Grizzly stomped forward, he spotted the trapped Lemnorian soldiers. They huddled behind a low wall, plasma bolts from Croc's snipers sizzling overhead. Jake didn't hesitate. He pushed his Walker into a lumbering charge, the Grizzly's thick armor shrugging off enemy fire. Jake extended the Walker's massive arm, scooping up the Lemnorians in one fluid motion. The soldiers cried out in surprise as they were lifted into the air. Jake deposited them safely behind a sturdy piece of cover. A young Lemnorian private looked up at the towering machine, his eyes wide. "By the stars," he gasped, "you saved us." "Thank you, human." Jake's voice crackled through the Grizzly's external speakers. "Just doing my job, Lemnorian. Now let's give those crocs hell." The Lemnorian troops rallied, their spirits lifted by the arrival of the human war machines. They fell in behind Jake's Grizzly, using its bulk as mobile cover as they pushed forward. High above, Greg watched the battle unfold from the Indomitable's bridge. His eyes narrowed as he spotted a massive Crocs dreadnought breaking through the orbital blockade. "That ship cannot reach the surface," Greg said, his voice tight. "All batteries, concentrate fire on that dreadnought. Take it down." The Indomitable shuddered as its main guns unleashed a devastating barrage. Energy beams lanced out, slamming into the Crocs ship's shields. But the alien vessel's armor held firm, its carapace-like hull deflecting the assault. Greg's comm crackled to life. "Commander Henry, this is Counselor Zander. We've captured intel on the dreadnought's weakness. It's shielded against energy weapons, but its underbelly is vulnerable to kinetic bombardment." Greg didn't miss a beat. "Understood, Counselor. All ships load kinetic strikes and prepare for a strafing run." The Black Fleet's vessels peeled off into attack formation. As they swooped past the dreadnought, they unleashed a stream of high-velocity slugs. The projectiles hammered the alien ship's exposed underside. Its shields flickered and failed under the brutal assault. "Now's our chance," Greg said. "All ships fire plasma torpedoes." A swarm of glowing projectiles streaked towards the crippled dreadnought. They impacted in rapid succession, melting through the alien vessel's armor. The dreadnought erupted in a spectacular explosion, its burning hulk plummeting towards Lemnos. On the planet's surface, Jake and his fellow Grizzly pilots watched in awe as the flaming wreckage rained down around them. The massive chunks of debris crushed the remaining Crocs forces, ending their resistance in one fell swoop. Jake let out a whoop of triumph, his voice carrying to the Lemnorian troops around him. "Did you see that? That's how humanity gets the job done." As the dust settled and the last pockets of Croc's resistance were mopped up, Greg addressed the combined human and Lemnorian forces. His voice carried across the comm channels, reaching every soldier on the battlefield. "Today we've struck a decisive blow against the forces of oppression and tyranny," Greg said, his words filled with pride. "The Crocs have been driven from Lemnos, and this world will know freedom once more." He turned to Counselor Zander, who stood beside him on the bridge. "You and your people have suffered greatly, but you've also proved your resilience and your heart. Humanity will stand with you as you rebuild." Zander bowed his head, his voice thick with emotion. "We owe you a debt that can never be repaid, Commander Henry. Lemnos will forever be an ally of the human alliance." As cheers echoed across the battered landscape of Lemnos, Greg allowed himself a small smile. Another world liberated, another evil defeated. But he knew the fight was far from finished. Out in the vast expanse of the galaxy, more threats loomed, threats that would test the mettle of humanity and their allies to the limit. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Greg's fingers hovered over the tactical display. He watched as Blake's infiltration team moved swiftly through the asteroid field, their progress marked by flickering dots on the holographic map. "Sir," Captain Lee called out, her eyes fixed on her console. "The Crocs fleets are closing fast, ETA 5 minutes until they're in weapons range." Greg nodded, his lips pursed. "Understood, Blake, status report." Lieutenant Blake's voice crackled over the comm, punctuated by the sound of distant explosions. "Second defense platform neutralized, Commander. Moving on to the third. These Lemnorian cloaking devices are working wonders." In the dense asteroid field surrounding the Croc shipyards, Corporal Jake Mason jetted between rocky outcroppings, his heart pounding. He could see the massive silhouette of the third defense platform looming ahead, its gun batteries sweeping the void. "Bravo team in position," Jake whispered into his comm. He gestured to the Lemnorian specialist beside him, who nodded and activated a small device. A wave of energy pulsed outward, momentarily disrupting the platform's sensors. Jake and his team surged forward, magnetic boots clamping onto the platform's outer hull. "Charges set," Jake reported, his fingers flying as he armed the explosive. 30 seconds to detonation." The team pushed off, thrusters flaring as they retreated to a safe distance. Jake counted down in his head, sweat beading on his forehead inside his helmet. A blinding flash erupted behind them as the charges detonated. The defense platform's main reactor went critical, tearing the structure apart in a spectacular explosion. "Third platform down," Blake's triumphant voice echoed through the comm channel. Aboard the Indomitable, a cheer went up from the bridge crew. Greg allowed himself a small smile before refocusing on the task at hand. "All ships, this is it," he broadcast. "Blake's team has opened a gap in their defenses. Commence attack pattern Omega. Hit them hard and fast before those reinforcements arrive." The Black Fleet surged forward, engines flaring bright against the backdrop of space. Fighters launched from carrier bays, streaking ahead of the main force. As they approached the shipyards, the true scale of the Crocs operation became clear. Half-constructed dreadnoughts and battle cruisers floated in massive dry docks, their hull plating gleaming in the light of the system's star. "My God," Captain Lee breathed. "If they'd finished building this fleet—" Greg's eyes hardened. "They won't get the chance. All batteries, open fire. Target those incomplete ships first." The Indomitable shuddered as its main guns unleashed a devastating barrage. Energy beams lanced out, slicing through the unfinished Crocs vessels. Secondary explosions blossomed along their hulls as ammunition stores and fuel tanks ignited. In the midst of the chaos, Jake and his team continued their sabotage mission. They moved from platform to platform, planting charges and disrupting defenses. "Commander," Jake called out, his voice strained, "we've got a problem. The last platform's shielding is too strong. We can't get close enough to take it out." Greg's mind raced, analyzing the tactical situation. "Understood, Corporal. Stand by." He turned to his weapons officer. "Concentrate all fire on that final platform. We need to overload its shields." The Indomitable's guns roared once more, joined by the combined firepower of the entire fleet. The platform's shields flared bright under the assault, energy crackling across its surface. "It's working," Captain Lee reported. "Shield strength down to 30% and falling." Just then alarm klaxons blared across the bridge. "Sir," an ensign shouted. "Crocs reinforcements have arrived, multiple capital ships dropping out of FTL." Greg's eyes narrowed. They were out of time. "Blake, get your people out of there now. All ships, prepare for close-quarters combat. We finish this mission whatever it takes." As the infiltration team scrambled back to their stealth ship, the skies above the Kradu's shipyards lit up with weapons fire. The battle for the future of humanity had begun in earnest. The Indomitable's bridge erupted into chaos as Commander Greg Henry barked orders. Alarms blared, panels flickered, and crew members rushed to their stations. Greg's eyes darted between tactical displays, assessing the unfolding battle. "Lieutenant Blake, status on that first defense platform?" Greg's voice cut through the cacophony. Blake's reply crackled over the comm, punctuated by distant explosions. "Platform neutralized, Commander. Moving to engage secondary targets now." Greg nodded, his expression resolute. "Excellent work, but we're on borrowed time. Enemy reinforcements inbound." He turned to his tactical officers, his voice sharp and clear. "Execute Alpha Strike. All ships target the shipyard's outer perimeter. Draw their fire away from our ground teams." The Black Fleet sprang into action. Massive turbolasers lit up the void, their energy beams lancing towards the Crocs shipyards. Plasma torpedoes streaked alongside, leaving fiery trails in their wake. The shipyard's shields flared brilliantly as they absorbed the initial barrage. But strategically placed infiltrator teams had done their work well. Pre-planted charges detonated across the facility, severing power relays and weakening the defensive grid. Greg watched intently as explosions blossomed across enemy lines. "Status report," he demanded. His XO's response was terse. "Shipyard defenses at 30%, sir. But we've got problems. Multiple Crocs battle groups breaking through in the outer sectors. Before Greg could respond, the main view screen filled with a terrifying sight. A colossal Crocs dreadnought loomed before them, its particle cannons already glowing with building energy. "Brace for impact!" Greg shouted. The Indomitable shuddered violently as the dreadnought opened fire. Consoles sparked and crew members were thrown from their seats. Greg's fingers dug into his chair's armrests. Evasive maneuvers, return fire, all batteries. The human flagship twisted in space, its own weapons blazing in defiance. As the two titans traded devastating blows, Greg keyed his comm once more. "Blake, we're taking a beating up here. What's your status?" The lieutenant's voice was strained, the sounds of battle clear in the background. "Almost at the central control nexus, Commander. Croc's resistance is heavy, but we're pushing through. If we can overload it, we'll knock out their main power grid." Greg's eyes narrowed. "Make it happen, Lieutenant. We'll buy you what time we can." Across the shipyards, Blake and his team fought tooth and nail towards their objective. Plasma bolts sizzled past their heads as they advanced, taking cover behind twisted wreckage. Jake Mason, the young Marine, hefted his riot cannon and laid down a blistering field of suppressing fire. "Keep moving," he yelled, his armor scorched but holding. Blake led the charge, his own weapon spitting death at any Crocs foolish enough to show themselves. "The Nexus is just ahead. Push forward." With a final desperate sprint, they reached the central power core. Blake's fingers flew over the controls, initiating the overload sequence. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he worked, fully exposed to enemy fire. A blinding flash erupted from the Nexus, followed by a thunderous boom that shook the entire facility. Shockwaves rippled outward, and suddenly the vast shipyards went dark. Half-built dreadnoughts and unmanned vessels drifted aimlessly, robbed of power and purpose. Blake's triumphant voice cut through the static. "Commander, the Nexus is down. Hit them now!" The Black Fleet unleashed hell. Missiles, bombs, and heavy ordnance rained down upon the crippled facility. Production lines were gutted, vital systems obliterated. The explosions that followed rivaled the birth of stars in their intensity. As the last of the Croc's defenses crumbled, Greg allowed himself a small, tight smile. "Damage assessment," he ordered. A weary chuckle came over the comm. It was Jake Mason, his voice rough but satisfied. "Not bad for a day's work, eh, Commander? Wouldn't mind a bit of shore leave after this." He opened a channel to the Lemnorian flagship. "Counselor Xander, we've dealt them a crippling blow, but this is just the beginning. The Crocs will keep coming until we take the fight to their homeworld." Xander's face appeared on the interface, his expression resolute. "Then that is where we must go next, Commander. The path ahead will be difficult, but Lemnos stands ready to march with humanity against the Crocs' menace." Greg nodded, his eyes scanning the battered but unbroken ships of his fleet. The battles to come would test them all to their limits, but today's victory had proven what they were capable of. With allies like the Lemnorians and warriors like Blake and Mason at his side, Greg knew humanity would never yield in the face of evil. The Black Fleet set course for its next objective, carrying with it the hopes of countless worlds. The war for the galaxy's future raged on. The bridge of the Indomitable hummed with tension, as Commander Greg Henry's words echoed through the fleet-wide channel. His fingers hovered over the tactical display, ready to unleash the full might of humanity's forces. "Lieutenant Blake, status report," Greg ordered, his voice low and controlled. Blake's whispered response came through, punctuated by the sound of shuffling feet on stone. "We're in the catacombs, sir. It's pitch black down here." Switching to night vision. In the depths beneath Krakar, Blake and his team moved silently through winding tunnels. Their boots crunched softly on ancient bones and debris. Jake Mason took point, his rifle sweeping the darkness ahead. "Movement!" Jake hissed, raising a fist. The team froze, melting into the shadows. A pair of Croc sentries rounded the corner, their scaled hides gleaming in the dim light of bioluminescent fungi. Blake held his breath, willing his racing heart to slow. The sentries passed within inches of their position, oblivious to the infiltrators' presence. As the sound of their footsteps faded, Blake exhaled slowly. "That was too close," he muttered. "Let's pick up the pace. We need to reach the power grid before they realize we're here." Back on the Indomitable, Greg paced the bridge, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. Captain Lee approached, her face etched with concern. "Sir, long-range sensors are picking up Croc's reinforcements. They'll be here in less than an hour." Greg nodded grimly. "Then we're on borrowed time. Blake needs to disable that grid now, or this whole operation is bust." In the catacombs, Blake's team emerged into a vast chamber. Ancient machinery loomed in the darkness, humming with barely contained energy. "This is it," Blake breathed. "The city's power core. Mason, plant those charges. The rest of you, watch our backs." Jake moved swiftly, attaching EMP devices to key points around the chamber. His hands worked with practiced efficiency, but sweat beaded on his forehead. "Charges set," Jake reported. "Ready to blow on your command, sir." Blake raised his hand to his earpiece. "Commander, we're in position, awaiting your go order." Greg's voice crackled through the comm. "Do it, Blake. Light 'em up." Blake nodded to Jake. "You heard the man. Let's end this war." A blinding flash erupted throughout the chamber. The air crackled with released energy as the EMP charges overloaded the power grid. In an instant, the once mighty Croc's capital plunged into darkness. Above the planet's surface, the orbital defense platforms flickered and died. Greg watched as the impenetrable shield surrounding Gregoria wavered and collapsed. "This is our chance," Greg announced, his voice steady. "All ships commence attack pattern Delta. Hit them with everything we've got." The Black Fleet surged forward, weapons blazing. Energy beams lanced out, striking the now defenseless Croc's installations. Fighters swarmed from carrier bays, screaming towards the planet's surface. In the chaos of the assault, Blake's voice cut through the comm chatter. "Commander, we've got company down here. Croc's forces converging on our position. Request immediate extraction." Greg's eyes hardened. He knew the risks when he'd sent them in, but he'd be damned if he'd leave them behind. "Hold tight, Blake," he replied. "We're coming for you." As the battle for Gregoria raged above and below, Greg turned to his helm officer. "Take us in. We're going to get our people out." The Indomitable plunged into the planet's atmosphere, racing against time to rescue the brave souls who'd made this assault possible.
The acrid stench of burning metal and ozone filled Jake's nostrils as he stood amid the ruins of Kakar. His ears rang from the thunderous impacts of the orbital bombardment, and his muscles ached from the desperate flight through the underground tunnels.
Jake snapped out of his daze and scrambled over piles of twisted debris to reach his commanding officer. Blake was hunched over a battered communications array, his face streaked with blood and grime. "Sir, what's our next move?" Jake asked, kneeling beside Blake. "We need to warn the fleet," Blake growled, his fingers flying over the controls. "The Crocs knew we were coming. This whole operation's gone to hell." A nearby explosion rocked the ground, showering them with chunks of concrete. Jake instinctively threw himself over Blake, shielding him from the debris. "Damn it!" Blake snarled, shoving Jake off. "I can't get a clear signal. The EMP must have fried half our equipment." Jake's heart pounded as he scanned the smoke-filled horizon. The distant sound of Croc's war cries sent chills down his spine. "Lieutenant Blake!" The crackling voice of Commander Greg Henry burst from Blake's partially functioning comm unit. "Status report." Blake grabbed the device, his fist clenched. "Commander, we're in deep shit. The Crocs were waiting for us. We've lost most of the team, and the city's defenses are still operational." Greg's reply was clipped and urgent. "Hold your position, Lieutenant. We're initiating Loki protocol." Blake's eyes widened in shock. "Sir, wait." His words were cut off as twin beams of searing crimson light sliced through the atmosphere. Jake watched in awe and terror as the orbital strike detonated above the city, unleashing a blinding electromagnetic pulse. The world around them went dark. Every light, every piece of machinery, even their own equipment sputtered and died. In the sudden, oppressive silence, Jake could hear his own ragged breathing. Before Jake could respond, the air filled with the blood-curdling howls of Croc's warriors. In the pitch-black tunnels below, the sounds of gunfire and screams echoed. "We have to move now," Blake shouted, grabbing Jake's arm. "Get to the surface. We need to warn the fleet." They stumbled through the darkness, relying on touch and memory to navigate the treacherous terrain. The sounds of combat grew closer, punctuated by the agonized cries of their fallen comrades. Jake's foot caught on something soft and yielding. He didn't need light to know it was the body of one of their own. "Keep moving, soldier!" Blake's voice cracked with strain and barely contained emotion. They emerged into a hellscape. The once mighty towers of Krakar lay in ruins, rivers of molten metal flowing through the streets. The air itself seemed to burn with each breath. A bone-chilling roar cut through the chaos. Jake turned to see a monstrous Croc's war machine lumbering towards them, its eyes glowing with malevolent hunger. "Run!" Blake screamed, shoving Jake forward. They sprinted through the devastated cityscape, the ground shaking with each step of the pursuing behemoth. Jake's lungs burned, his legs screamed for relief, but the primal fear of being caught drove him onward. A dead end loomed before them. Jake spun, raising his rifle on pure instinct, only to hear the sickening click of an empty chamber. The Croc's war machine bore down on them, its massive jaws opening wide. Jake stood his ground, refusing to close his eyes in the face of death. Suddenly, the screech of tortured metal filled the air. A battered grizzly assault walker slammed into the Croc's machine, sending both titans sprawling. The grizzly's hatch popped open, revealing Lieutenant Blake at the controls. His face was a mask of dogged drive as he wrestled with the mech's damaged systems. "That's one of mine, you overgrown insect," Blake roared, driving the grizzly's fist into the Croc's machine's armored hide. Jake watched in awe as the two behemoths clashed, the ground shaking beneath their titanic struggle. Blake's skill was evident in every move, every counterstrike against the larger Croc's machine. Just as it seemed the alien monstrosity would gain the upper hand, the sky lit up once more. The Indomitable descended through the clouds, its weapons blazing. Under the combined assault, the Croc's war machine finally crumpled. In the aftermath, Blake emerged from the smoking grizzly, his face etched with pain and exhaustion. Jake rushed to his side, supporting his mentor's weight. Blake's eyes scanned the devastation around them, his expression growing increasingly grim. "We failed, Jake," he said softly. "The command structure is intact. This was all for nothing." Jake felt a lump form in his throat as the weight of their situation sank in. Blake turned to him, his eyes haunted. "You need to contact the commander," Blake ordered. "Tell him to call off the attack. We can't win this, not today, not at this cost." Jake's hand trembled as he raised his comm unit. "Indomitable, this is Corporal Mason. Lieutenant Blake's team was decimated. The infiltration failed. I repeat, the infiltration failed." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Then Commander Greg Henry's voice came through, heavy with the burden of command. "Understood, Corporal. All ships disengage and withdraw from Kragoria space. I say again, full retreat from the system." Jake lowered the comm unit, his heart heavy. He watched as the mighty ships of the Black Fleet began to break orbit, leaving behind the scarred surface of Kragoria. Blake placed a hand on Jake's shoulder, his grip firm despite his injuries. "We'll be back," he said, his voice low but filled with cold persistence. "This isn't over, not by a long shot." You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.